Rolling live. Hi, everyone. This is S.J. Thomason with Christian-Apologist.com, and I am here with two wonderful women, Lisa and Lori, and we're going to talk about a very interesting topic. Are American values or U.S. values, are the typical values in the United States from Christianity? Are many of our values derived from Christianity, or how are our values similar to Christianity? We're going to talk about some of those sorts of topics today, and we're just going to have a free flow, fun conversation. And so without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over. So we'll start off with Lisa, since she was first to show up on the call, and then Lori, and if you guys just want to introduce yourselves and maybe even mention the names of your websites, because I know both of you have websites and YouTube channels.
All right. Well, thanks again for having me on, SJ. It's always a pleasure to be on your channel. You're a wonderful person, and I really appreciate your ministry. My ministry, I have a blog. I blog at thinkdivinely.com, and I write on primarily Christian apologetics. Sometimes I throw in a few extra little things regarding, the values of Christianity and how you walk a Christian life. I also work for Women in Apologetics, womeninapologetics.com, and we highlight you guys. So it's kind of like the hub for all of things that women do in the field of apologetics. So Lori, you're on there, Stephanie's on there. Pretty much any woman who does type of apologetic ministry, we have them listed alphabetically on the site. So there's all kinds of resources, by the way, on there too. There's websites and blogs and videos and all kinds of stuff. So I do communications for them. And then I also teach at my local church in Wisconsin, where we have lots of cheese and beer, but not at church.
That's so true. Wisconsin's known for that, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's funny. So, okay, great. Thank you so much. And let's go to Lori.
Hi, everybody. I'm Lori, and my website is called The Spoon-Fed Soul because I experienced so much personal healing, basically, from doubling down on my relationship with Jesus. Getting serious about my walk with God, making it a point to read the scriptures and really know what they said and what they didn't say, that it became very apparent to me that many of us who bear the name of Christ do not actually study our scriptures really well and know what they say. And when we do, there is an awful lot of soul nourishment. So it's up to each one of us to be responsible, to be self-feeders of the word. And then when I started studying apologetics, I realized that we could also be self-feeders of the evidence for the word and for the reliability of the scriptures and the historicity of Jesus and those sorts of things. So when we take responsibility to feed ourselves those truths, then all sorts of things shift into place. We can lose a great deal of our insecurities and our worries and our fears and our bad habits simply by realigning our minds and our souls with the truth as God has proclaimed it. And so that's what I do on the Spoon-Fed Soul. And I'm in the process right now of creating all new content. So anyway, so that should be fun in the near future to see how that turns out.
Yeah, that's great. So, and both of you are so active in this community. I have to say, you're kind of rare in that you're women, and I'm a woman too, in this sort of apologetics field, because I don't know if you've noticed this, but it seems like it's overwhelmingly populated by males. Males seem to be doing almost all of the writing too in the books. Have you guys noticed that?
Yeah, but I think primarily it's because women are distracted by, taking care of kids and stuff. I mean, not all women do that, but I think a lot of women, they just don't have time. And so a really good ministry, another really good ministry that focuses on that and trains women up to learn apologetics is Mama Bear Apologetics. And so they have podcasts and they try to help women learn this stuff. But I really do think that women are going to be publishing more. I know that Elisa Childers is coming out with a book in the fall. I know Mama Bear Apologetics got published. I know Mary Jo Sharp has a book coming out. I actually have a devotional I wrote, a 365-day apologetic devotional. And I've been trying to get it published, and I've given up trying to get traditionally published, so I'm just going to self-publish it. But so I think women are doing more stuff in the field, but I do think I think the last maybe 5 or 10 years has probably changed a little bit, but I think primarily a lot of people thought that it was very kind of debate oriented and polemic, and women are like, I'm not really into that. And so women in apologetics, one of the things that we do, and I really, really appreciate the ministry, is that we really focus on how does a woman bring apologetics into a relational aspect, a more conversational style? Because a lot of women just aren't into the whole debating thing, although there's very good reasons to debate. And I actually appreciate debates a lot. I personally would not want to be in one, though. And I think that there's a lot of women who probably feel the same way. But I do think it's changing. And I do think, SJ, I know you're working on a book. So I bet you in the next 5-10 years, we'll see a lot more women with published books in the field. And they'll bring a different slant, I think. They'll bring, hopefully, the more relational aspect of how do you just deal with this on a daily basis with your family and the people you work with and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I like that. And Susan's in the audience saying, don't forget Nancy Piercy. And I'll also throw out Lydia McGrew. I've had them on my channel. They're great.
They are great.
And you just mentioned Alyssa Childers. I have to say, I just discovered her. I was somehow I found her on YouTube and I listened to a few of her videos. Yeah. And I love her stuff. She's great. Yeah. I'd like to have her on my channel too.
So her focus, she's got a niche. Her focus is progressive Christianity. And so that's where she's going because she came from a sort of a progressive Christian background, and she almost lost her faith because of it. And so her whole book is all about that. I'm really excited to read it. She's going to come out. I think it's going to come out this fall sometime. But yeah, so that's her. Yeah, so I think she has a niche there. And I think that's the key to this whole thing is find out, well, what is your niche? What's your passion in apologetics? Because apologetics has so many different little niches that you can sort of plug yourself into,
Yeah, I can relate to the progressive Christianity because that exact same thing happened to me too. I was reading Wayne Dyer and all of these different people who basically equalize all of the religions. They think they're all on equal footing. And right. I didn't even realize there's a line in the Bible during this period that says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Nobody gets to the Father except through the Son. I would have totally discounted that in my progressive times.
Yeah.
So
you'll have to have Elisa on because she'll be able to tell you all about that.
Good. Excellent.
Yeah.
So let's talk about what both of you think about American values. Like, what would you, I remember there's an old book that's from the early 1900s by Max Weber, who's a German, and he called it The Protestant Work Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism. And he talked a lot about capitalism for one, and about our industriousness, our thriftiness, and and thrifty being we're kind of tight with the money. We're not out there big spenders or things like that. Now, of course, there's exceptions to the rule, but those were a couple of the values that he attributed to Protestantism. And he thought that he differentiated Protestantism from Catholicism. And he said that the Catholics were really focused more on the afterlife. And so it was the meek would inherit the world. And the Protestants were more thrifty. But the interesting thing is that the Protestants over in Europe, a lot of times have these really small churches, and the Catholics have these gigantic churches. And so it's like, where do they put their money? but there's differences with that. But I'm just wondering, do you see some of the values maybe in the Declaration of Independence or that are just prevalent today as stemming possibly from Christianity, or do you think that they've been around just forever?
Well, I definitely think that, the whole reason, the United States was even sort of founded was on a basis of having, the right to freely worship how you want to worship and not have it be state sanctioned. Mm-hmm. So the whole reason why we even started was based on a principle that they didn't want it to be a mandated forced religion like the Church of England. And so they wanted to come here and that includes all kinds of different faiths. And so that was the whole sort of, impetus, I think, is breaking away from that mindset of having a church that was tied in with the government. So I think that was, a founding principle. But I love the fact that, there's a statement that says that we are, we have a creator, that we're endowed with these inalienable rights from being created beings, not highly evolved, animals, but created beings that have, innate inherent value because they are created in God's image. And I think that's the root of the human rights movement, is because, everyone is created in the image of God, which gives them inherent value.
Yeah, I agree. I know there is a raging debate as to whether or not our founding fathers were Christians or not, but I don't think you really can, I don't think you can get away from the fact that they had a Christian worldview, even though not all of them necessarily were personally practicing Christians. They all had a Christian worldview, and it's in our founding documents. It's like Lisa said in the Declaration of Independence. They gave credit to the fact that there was a creator, that we did not create ourselves, that there was a creator, and that we were made in his image, and that really kind of served a foundational purpose in the type of government that our founding fathers put together, keeping all of those things in mind. And I know, for one, having grown up in the 80s and hearing the term separation of church and state thrown around so much, that it never occurred to me until I went to Washington, D.C. Several years ago. And I can't remember where I saw it. It might have been at the Bible Museum. I don't know if you've seen it, but there's a tour that takes you around. It's a simulation, and you go from museum to museum to museum to all the different monuments. And it gives you a bird's eye view of all of the scriptures that are etched into the buildings in Washington, D.C. And I really had no idea until I took that tour. I mean, it is everywhere. The idea that our founding fathers and our history isn't rich with biblical truth is just a mistake. I mean, it is literally everywhere in Washington, D.C., because it was on the minds of our founding fathers that they wanted to build a particular kind of government based on what they came from, and what they saw was individual life and value, and all having this inherent worth that needed to be recognized on the basis of the fact that we were created by a creator. So yeah, I think that there's an awful lot of overlap between American values and Christian values. It's not a perfect match necessarily, but there's an awful lot of overlap.
That's really fascinating. I've been to Alexandria, Virginia a bunch of times, because that's the headquarters of our management group in this group I affiliate with. But I've never been to DC. I've seen DC from where you can see it from the hotel rooms if you're high up, but I haven't. That's fascinating. I'd love to go on that tour. That sounds really cool.
It was great.
And I understand now, Greg Kuchel wrote a book, and in his book, he said 51 of the 55 founding fathers actually are Christians. So there were a few that aren't, but the majority of them are. So I know that there's a theme going around among a lot of atheists that we were founded in deism and this sort of thing.
Well, I think Thomas Jefferson was more of a deist, from what I understand, but I am certainly not a historian. So I mean, I don't know exactly what he believed. He believed in a God, but I don't think he necessarily embraced the Christian God, because I think that there was even a Thomas Jefferson Bible I had heard that where he like sort of took out certain things, things that he didn't like or whatever, and he, but so deism would be, there is a God that's not a personal God, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, he still had the idea
the
of a
whole
creator.
Universe, and then he slipped away.
Yeah, he's like started the clock ticking and
bailed.
Like
a bad dad. He's a bad dad, right?
Right.
The universe and basically said bye. Okay, so what I'm thinking though, as far as what you guys are saying, that is also a unifying factor that I pulled from some of this, is what's interesting is cross-cultural studies, like from Gert Hofstede and from the Globe. They found that we in the United States have the highest levels of individualism in the world, and that's as opposed to, say, collectivism. And that's also corresponding to our GDP. It corresponds to a number of pretty good things. But would you say that some of that could come from Christianity too? Do you think some people argue that Jesus was about communism, but because of the early church and the way that they were sharing with each other so much. But what do you think about Jesus? Do you think that that's the message that he was teaching?
I think that collectivism is actually a mistake. The idea that Jesus was a fan of collectivism is quite a mistake, despite some of the passages where it may seem that way, and we can get to that. We can certainly get to that. But I think without question, one of the roots of the Christian relationship is that it's one-on-one. There are lots of scriptures that specifically talk about, first of all, how we will be judged individually. So that's really the problem, or one of the problems with like a Marxist view, is that the individual is guilty or innocent based on the group they're in. It doesn't really have anything to do with their individual choices. It has to do with how they're labeled, what group they fall into. And that's not at all compatible with Christianity. Clearly, we have been given free will. clearly we have been given freedom to exercise that free will. And it's the expectation, of course, from God that we will choose to use our free will in ways that align with his word. And then if we don't, we are held accountable individually. So that's really where that Protestant work ethic comes from, is that there is so much invested in the idea that I am directly accountable to God for how I live my life, whether I fritter it away, whether I'm idle, or whether I'm doing the important things, taking care of my family, earning an honest wage at the end of an honest day's work, whether I'm using those funds in ways that honor God and take care of my family and my nuclear family, my immediate family, and my extended family. That Protestant work ethic really reflects all of those realities that are hinged on the immediate responsibility that I have to God to live my life within certain parameters. So I think that although sometimes American individualism goes too far, and we think we don't have to live to consider anybody else, we have to do it all by ourselves. And of course, there is a community aspect to church and Christianity and learning from one another. There really is this sense of individualism as far as being responsible to God on a daily basis and having to answer for the choices that we make. So I think in that respect, individualism is quite compatible with Christianity, and it explains why we see so much in industry and resourcefulness in American history. But
there is a bigger narrative, and I think this is where it's not an either or thing. It's kind of an and but because I think everything you said is exactly right. But I also think that, the bigger narrative is that we are, as Christians, at least, a part of the body of Christ. So that then sort of, alludes to the fact that there is, sort of a collective body that we are involved in. And so I think people get kind of confused sometimes with that, because like, well, what is that? How does that really actually play out practically? But there is that aspect that we have the bigger picture, that we are in the kingdom of God as Christians, and that there's a bigger narrative that transcends the United States of America. So that's another thing that we have to remember. It's like, yes, we are part of the United States of America, and I'm very happy to be an American, but I'm also, a part of this other bigger picture as being in the body of Christ, of believers. So I think, that's where the confusion sometimes gets. It's like people think, oh, it's all about that, or it's all about the other thing. It's not. It's both. We do have an individual responsibility to, step up and talk to God when we're facing him someday and say, hey, I tried my best. But we're also, a part of this collective of believers doing his will on earth, bringing as much of the kingdom on earth as it is in heaven. So I think that's where, some things get kind of confused. And one of the things, I just wrote a blog about this. It's interesting that you said, Lori, about how it's kind of changed recently, because it has changed. Like the original founding fathers, from what I know, and again, I'm not a historian, but the understanding of the right to the pursuit of happiness from the original concept of that was more of a pursuit of happiness as a society, breaking away from, England. So we had the right to pursue that, to have our freedom of religion and those kinds of things. It was seen more as a societal right. And I think what's happened is it's morphed into an individual right to pursue happiness, however I want to pursue it. So the blog I wrote is called Expressive Individualism. And it's actually a thing where that they actually did the 2015 U.S. Supreme Court decision on gay marriage was based on expressive individualism. And so that's a worldview that says I have a right to express my individual, take on things, as long as I don't hurt anybody else. As long as that doesn't hurt anybody, I have, I can expressly individualize, my life to the exclusion of whatever else is going on around, as long as, I don't hurt anybody else. And so they actually made that decision, 2015, I think it was, based on this worldview. And that, you know, on the outskirts of that worldview, it sounds fine. It's like, oh yeah, we all want to be expressively individualizing ourselves, and you know, that's cool, until all of a sudden, what if your expressive individualism affects my life? And then all of a sudden, how does that then, you know, sort of do the domino effect? All of a sudden it's like, okay, well, you know, you can do whatever you want, but then you're asking me to do something that's going to affect my life, and then, you know, it's going to affect somebody else's life. And then there's this domino effect that I think people don't always realize when they try to expressly individualize their own way of pursuing this happiness, right? And so, and then what it's spawned is a terrible form, I think, of you know, this whole me first attitude, you know, and I read a little bit about that too. And that started happening in the 1970s, this whole me first thing. Because in the 1960s, all these ideas have such weird consequences. You never know how they're going to play out in the long run until you start looking back in history, and you're like, okay, now I see how this tied into something else, right? So in the 60s, it was like, you know, this more of a societal, like, you know, everyone wanted to be chill and cool and peace and love everybody and all that hippie stuff, right? And it was more of a societal hippie stuff. And the root was, you know, to try to bring in, you know, good things. But then somehow in the 1970s, there was a shift to a sort of a self-esteem. So they started teaching about self-esteem and education. And I remember I was going to school in the 70s, man. And so I remember that. It's like, you know, it was all about you, and everyone was a winner, and we're all going to do this together. And instead of making people feel better, it morphed into narcissism. And then it turned into this, like, now we're like all about the selfies, right? And we're all about these reality TV shows, and everybody's about trying to one up the next guy, or, you know, and it's very, so I think all of that is spawning this new division that we have in America. Because if you can't agree on morals, and if everybody's expressively individualizing their own right to pursuit of happiness, then where is the commonality of the moral code? Where do we find, you know, a unity instead of this division that we're facing right now? I think we're facing a lot of division because of these different individual little ways of defining what they want, what people want. And so the sense of cohesion and of the United States of America, I think, have become more divided, you know?
Yeah. I think the news channels are doing that to us, because when I was young, as you recall, both of you recall probably, but I remember they only had, the news was on for like an hour a night from 6 to 7 or something like that, or 5 to 6, whatever it was. Yeah. And then you watched other TV, and other shows were on, and the shows were things like in the 60s, I don't remember what was in the, you know, Jetsons or whatever, those different funny little shows, or Flintstones. And then you go into the 70s and the 80s, and you start getting like, moving from maybe the liberal to the conservative view, and Alex P. Keaton is suddenly really famous. And now we've got this whole rift between Fox News and MSNBC and CNN, and it's just made things pretty awful.
I agree. But it stemmed from these ideas, though. It stemmed from these, you know, ideas of self-esteem and the me first culture and all that stuff. I mean, I think the media is just, I mean, playing off what the culture is talking about, you know, and they perpetuate the idea. Definitely, they do that. But I do think that it's morphed. I think that the original founding fathers, the right to pursuit of happiness was more of a collective. I don't even, you know, I know that's got hot buttons on that word, but more of a collective right as a society to pursue happiness away from this, you know, tyranny of you know, Britain, and the taxes and all that stuff that was happening, you know, unfair representation. And so I think that's what they meant. I don't think 250 years later, they'd be like, okay, expressive individualism was not what they were talking about. Right. And so I wonder, you know, because we have such a pluralistic society now, where can we find unity? How can we, you know, break this divide that's happening? It's breaking my heart. I see so many people, you know, especially on social media. Oh my goodness, social media brings out the worst in people sometimes, man. It's like such anger and division, and just like, you know, spewing off this stuff, and just, you know, this is not gonna bode well for our country, you know, in the long term.
You just reminded me of something that I think is funny. I was riding down the road today. I was taking my son to the dermatologist. We're driving down the road and we get behind this bumper sticker on a car ahead of us. And this sticker says, my son sees it from a distance. He's like, oh, look, it says Fox News on there. I said, oh yeah, let's see what it says. So we get closer and it says Fox News, where you go for what did it say? It said when you don't care about the facts. So my son takes a picture of it and sends it to my husband, and my husband loves Fox News. So my husband said, "Go let the air out of their tires." So I just get out of here.
Right. But it's so easy. It's like, that even your kid knows this. Everyone knows like what side everybody else is on. Oh, if you want this side, you go watch that one. Or you want the other side, watch this other one. It's like there's an obvious divide. And to me that's sad, you guys. I don't know about you. I'm just feeling like, we're all Americans. We should be Americans first. I mean, yeah, we have two different parties, but it's almost like we have two different countries. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like such a division. It's I mean, I think it's good to have, different parties and different ideas, but not to the point where we just demonize the other people all the time,
Well, that's what my son said. He said, "Who are you going to vote for?" And I said, I'm not telling you who I'm voting for. I said, because if I say I'm voting for Trump, my husband will be happy and my dad will be mad. And if I say I'm voting for Biden, my dad will be happy and my husband will be mad. I can't win. So I'm not telling either of them who I'm voting for. And I actually haven't even decided yet. I told him.
Yeah. So. Yeah, well, I mean, this is why I think, it's a good topic that you brought up, because American values and Christian values line up in many ways, but they don't line up in a lot of ways recently. I think recently there's been a shift. So American values have become a lot more me-centered and me-focused, and I don't think that's a great shift, because there's a lot of pride in that. Like there's just a lack of humility, a lack of a servanthood, a lack of being otherly minded. Like that's a Christian value, otherly mindedness. It's not even taught anymore. Like consider the other person, I mean, like, remember like when people would open the doors and let you walk through and stuff like that. I mean, yeah. I can't tell you how many times the door slams in my face and people don't even think about it, because they're not being taught that virtue.
Well, I think that actually, circles around. I think the word that we're all looking for is not collective, it's consensus. There was an agreement among our founding fathers. There was a consensus that each of us had a certain responsibility to exercise our choices and our decisions and build our lives and pursue our happiness within a specific framework. Now, inside that framework, you could do whatever. You could be as individual as you wanted to be, but there were very definite boundaries about how we were supposed to live. And those boundaries were assumed to be, at the time, they were all supported, defined by a biblical worldview. I mean, they simply, also everything that you did as an individual, no matter how individual you were, it all fell within the same boundaries. And so that's what's different about today. It's not I don't know so much that about if you could call it a shift in American values. I suppose it would be fairer to say is a shift in cultural values. Yeah. That all of a sudden in the last 20 years or so, I think it even shows up as early as, if I remember correctly, in the opinion given at Roe versus Wade. I can't remember who wrote it, but somebody wrote in there that we all have the right to define our own existence. Okay, so the founding fathers would have never gone for that. They would have never said that's okay. They would have said, no, our existence has been defined for us. So we have to make our choices within those boundaries. And so somehow that individualism has gone outside the biblical worldview. And so that's where the division is that the biblical worldview has been exceeded, or in some cases dismissed or ignored, and that allows our individualism to go way beyond the bounds that our founding fathers originally ever foresaw.
Right.
I see that playing out with divorces too, because remember years ago, it was stigmatized to have a divorce. People didn't want to get divorced. It was embarrassing. And now depending on which ethnicity you're from, could be very, very high percentages of people just not getting married in the first place, or raising kids as single moms. And I think that's changed society in not very good ways.
40% of all live births are to single women. 40%. Wow. That's almost half. So that right there goes to tell you that's a value that's shifted too. Like women can think they can do this on their own. Like they don't really need a guy. It's like, wait till you have the kid, and then you realize you really do need it is never meant to be a solo thing. I mean, parenting is hard. Now I recognize that, you know, there's circumstances and things that happen to people that force them into that situation. But, you know, I think there's this idea that's perpetuated, you know, of that individual, like the individual mom can just be an individual. You don't need to have, you know, the partner or whatever. And even with marriage too, it's like, well, marriage is this like old institution that's not, you know, we don't really need that. We love each other. We don't need a piece of paper to show it, and we're just going to live together and it's all good, you know. And so so those are the kind of values that I think have, you know, consensus has changed.
Yeah, well, even if I go back, I look at my parents, for example. They've been married over 50 years, and they've been through ups and downs and ups and downs. And we had some hard times, you know, as a family financially when I was in my 20s. I remember they were, again, ups and downs. And they just stuck it together. And now my mom has Lewy body dementia. I think I mentioned that to you guys before. And my dad is just being an incredible champ. Suddenly he's doing the cooking, he's doing the cleaning, all these things that my mom traditionally did. He's turned around, and he's really and that's a marriage that I look at and I say, that's what you want. Yeah. A lot of times people just say, oh, I'm not happy anymore. I'm going to go ahead and leave my husband, or things just aren't happy at home. Who cares about happy? Sometimes you're not going to be happy all the time.
Right. Well, there's the commitment. You know, I mean, Jesus really told us that, I mean, it's a man and a woman should not separate. It's supposed to be, honestly, a reflection of Christ and the church.
Right.
That's ultimately what marriage was religious in its historical rootings. It was actually a religious institution, and it's to reflect Christ and the church. And Christ and the church is faithful, and they're committed. You know, and you have a bad day. Oh well, tomorrow will be better. You know, It's like, you hang in there, you know, and so, I mean, obviously there's exceptions to the rule again with that. I mean, if you're in an abusive relationship or somebody's, you know, not faithful or those kind of things, and they break their commitment to you, then that's, you know, those are different reasons. But what you're saying, SJ, is right. There's been a lot of like, oh, I'm just not happy, or I'm not, you know, attracted to that person anymore, or we don't have, you know, great stuff in the bedroom anymore, so I'm done, you know, or whatever, you know. I mean, people do that. Right. And it's like, and the grass is greener on the other side. And then they get to the other side and the grass isn't so greener anymore.
Yeah. I think that's one of our traditional values, is this idea of a family, you know, your traditional nuclear family, as they call it. And I see that breaking down in society in many places. And that's a shame. And I've seen it when I went to Europe years ago. I was there in the early 2000s to see cousins over in Germany. I remember my cousin saying, oh, people over here, we don't get married much anymore. We have kids. We're planning. She had a boyfriend at the time, and they were planning on having kids and never getting married. And I thought, that's interesting. Where'd that come from? So,
well, it's rooted again in all the pluralistic worldviews. So, you know, what you were saying, Lori, about a biblical worldview, people are chucking that. They don't even want to be married to that anymore. They don't even like that idea. They get angry at that idea, and they get defensive about that idea, and they don't understand that idea. Ultimately, I don't think they understand what a biblical worldview is, but they don't want anything to do with it. Then they throw the whole separation of church and state in your face, right? They do. I mean,
no, I get it. I do. In fact, I think that consensus that I was mentioning earlier, if we could get back to that, which is one of the reasons why we need more apologists and more women apologists, because we need to be able to make a defense for that biblical worldview. Because if you understand not just the virtue in commitment, which is obvious that's a benefit to marriage. There's a safety. I don't think people understand that. There's a safety in having a lifelong commitment. That means we can mess up as human beings, and still that person won't walk out. There's a great deal of stability and confidence in that we're underselling. But even above and beyond that, in terms of a biblical worldview, if God made man and woman and pronounced them husband and wife, that is, without a question, from the perspective of a biblical worldview, that is the primary unit on which a society is built. That's a family, not a government, not a business, not a school, not a civic organization. It's the family. So no wonder societies break down and have all sorts of problems when the family breaks down, because God intended, from a biblical worldview, God intended family to be the primary unit of a society. And so when we understand that, that changes the way we look at marriage. It changes the way we consider marriage partners. It changes how we view divorce. It changes how we view family and children. It changes all of that, because all of a sudden we realize it's not just about my personal well-being or my personal satisfaction or my personal romantic purposes. It's about participating in society the way God had originally intended, which is to be built through families. And so, that if we can help people understand that, of course, that gets into gender and hierarchies and things like that. But if we can help people understand that there's more to a family than just a relationship of choice, it's bigger than that, then we can help recreate some of that consensus towards the biblical worldview.
That's what I would say. I'd want to promote that too, promote this idea of family, because that is just like you guys are both kind of alluding to, is that's our first experience in the world, is with our family. Yeah. And then we go out eventually into the workplace, and to schools and then the workplace and those sorts of things.
So how would you answer the skeptics' claim that, the biblical worldview's definition of family can be evolved and changed, and we don't have to have the traditional worldview? I mean, like, there's lots of shows now, Modern Family and things, that showing the different types of families. Families look different. I mean, the biblical worldview is narrow in its definition. So what would you say to somebody that said that?
Well, actually, you had mentioned it already. It's the idea that a marriage is the picture of Jesus and the church. It's the relationship between Jesus and the church. So if that's the case, then that means that the relationship between Jesus and the church existed in God's mind before he created man and woman. And he created men and women to play those roles, so that the relationship between them would first have a covenant. So we had, in the same way that we have a covenant of marriage to our husbands, that kind of relationship is necessary in our relationship to Jesus for it to be a legitimate relationship with Jesus. First, there's a covenant. Then there's the consummation, which obviously the union between the two of them, obviously, and it has different connotations between a man and a woman physically, and the physical union, excuse me, as compared to the consummation between Jesus and his believer. But literally, it's all over the New Testament. Jesus gets placed inside us. So there's that inside out, interlocking, consummative relationship between Jesus and the church that is reflected in the physical union between husband and wife. And then, so first we have covenant, and then we have consummation, and it ends up with conception. So that's obvious, and it's obvious to see in the physical relationship, that's where babies come from. But in the spiritual relationship, you have that new life that the church, that the believer, either individual or collectively as the church, we carry around the life of Jesus inside us. That's not an accident that the physical relationship and the spiritual relationship mirror one another. That's how God designed it. Right. And so that being the case, the evidence is literally everywhere. It's all around us. Every marriage, every family, every person born had to go through that same physical method of getting here. We all had to be created in that same way. And that was predicated on the relationship between Jesus and the believer. And so we can change that here on earth. We can make the decision we're not going to follow that pattern, but that's how it was originally intended to be. And so if we really do want to have, if we want things to turn out the way they are supposed to turn out, if we want husbands to treat wives the way they're supposed to treat wives, and they've got to recognize that they are called upon by God, husbands are, to love their wives self-sacrificially the way Jesus loved the church, that otherly that Lisa was talking about, that other-centeredness. That's how it works. Because that's how it was designed to work. And when we step away from that, we're going to end up costing ourselves something.
Right. I think that's really good. And I think that works for Christians. And I think that as Christians, we're a witness to the world and how our marriages are working. And if they don't see any difference between our marriages and a non-believer marriage, then that's going to be an issue. So I think that we live in a pluralistic society, so not everybody's going to believe in Jesus. They're not going to all believe that, the Bible is true. And that story that you just said is true. So we're going to have to, as Christians, I think the best thing we can always do is just walk our talk, man. We basically, like, try to show that, try to live your life and show that, by your example. Because I think that, there's going to be, because America is full of different worldviews now, and that's what's causing some of the division, and it's going to continue because people are not everybody's going to be Christian, not everybody's going to, they're just not going to be. And so how do we navigate America when we have all these different various worldviews? I mean, they're just going to have to be people watching Christians, I think, to see that, oh gosh, look at that marriage. Look at how they're doing. I really want that. And their family life is really good. And their kids are doing well. What's your secret? You say,
yeah, that goes back to the first times too. I remember I read something from early pagans were saying, look at how the Christian women, they're not cheating on their husbands, are not out being prostitutes or doing anything like that, because a lot of the pagan women's were doing that.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and I think there are studies done. I've heard, that, there's just as much divorce in the church than not. But I've actually heard that that's depending on who you are surveying, that among born again believers who are really committed to, walking a spirit-filled life and a life that's really dedicated to, that intimacy with God, that, like what you're talking about, Lori, about, you're being in the word, you're following the precepts of what Christ has said, that divorce in that type of situation is not very high. Now, I don't know where that I can't quote that. I don't know what survey that was done on, but I did hear about that. So I think it depends too on, like we were talking about earlier, like what kind of Christianity do you live? Are you a progressive Christian where you don't even believe necessarily that the Bible is, the inspired word of God? Or are you a dedicated, Orthodox historic Christian who believes that this stuff is really real and they're going to live their life by it? So I think that that's another thing too, is that you have all these different types of even Christian, witnesses, I guess, in society, where you've got some people that are sold out hardcore, bona fide believers. And then you got people who say they're Christian, right? But they don't even know what that really means. They don't even know, like, I'm a Christian because I was raised Christian. It's like, well, okay, but like, why is Christianity true? Why are you really Christian? And I know you guys have all talked about that. It's like, well, that's another whole thing too. It's like, well, people sometimes will say that they're Christian, and they really don't even understand what that means. So I think that, the best thing we can do is educate people and continue to do these shows and help people understand what is a biblical worldview. What does that mean? How can we define that? How can we show that? And then live our lives that way. Walk our talks.
Yeah. I want to ask you a question for both of you. So we were talking about family and the importance of family. Who's the head of the household? Because at one time I thought I got to wear some of the pants, but that's not really the case. So what's your take on when people say that?
I've been married for 28 years to Mario, and he is a true man of God. And so, he leads the family, but it doesn't mean he leads the family like I'm just sort of like this weird chick on a ball and chain and he just pulls me around. It's not like that. When I mean that he leads the family, he's the one that is ultimately accountable to God, for the spiritual condition of our family, for one thing. But, he's submitted to God. Like what Lori was saying, if you have a man who's totally submitted to God, you gladly follow him because he's already sold out to treating you the way that Jesus would treat you, and so it's easy to follow that person. And in every situation, there has to be a buck stopper, right? You can't have two people, doing this all the time and button heads and I'm going to make the decision. No, I'm going to make the decision. Then you're going to have conflict. There's ultimately got to be a buck stopper. And, the Christian biblical worldview is that is set up that the men are the ultimate buck stoppers, but that doesn't, that's been so misunderstood. And I think that, people and women need to understand that doesn't mean that we're, little doormats and we don't say anything and we just like, hey, whatever, husband, can I go shopping today? Because I don't even know if I can go shopping. It doesn't mean that. It means that he is accountable to God for the spiritual, condition of our family, and he prays for the family. He should, at least. This is the things he should be doing. So the waters the wife with the word of God, right? And leads in that way. But when it comes to Mara and I, the way we have always operated, we make decisions together. It's like when we moved out to Wisconsin, we moved from Santa Barbara, California. People are like, why did you move from Santa Barbara, California to Wisconsin?
That's a good question.
So I didn't just go, okay, honey, whatever you think. I mean, it's not like that. We made the decision together. We're partners, right? We're partners. And so sometimes I'll take the lead in a certain area that I'm strong in, and he'll take the lead in other areas that he's strong in. And it's okay with that. He's not this kind of Jethro guy who's like, okay, little woman, I'm going to be the one that takes all the decisions. He's not like that. It's a partnership. And I think that's what the whole narrative of the Bible is too. It's like Jesus wants us to also make decisions. He does not dictating every step we make. He gives us free will. He tells us what to do. He gives us the mandates of how to live our lives. And then it's like raising kids. Once you get to a certain point, Jesus wants us to act on what he's taught us. So it's a partnership even with Christ. So that's my soapbox.
I like that. That's a tough, because people always say another thing that they say is they'll talk about 1 Timothy 2:12. They tell me to be quiet a lot on Twitter and say,
well, again, what I get really frustrated with, SJ, and I'm sure you got this, Lori, too, is so many people do not take the time to study what that means. And it's not easy. You really have to, you can't just cherry pick scriptures and throw them out there. You have to understand what was happening at the time that was written. What was the culture like? Was there a specific thing that somebody was addressing? Is that prescriptive or descriptive? In other words, did that describe a situation, or was that a prescription for all women, all time, all the way until Jesus comes back the second time? It's like, you really have to be careful with that, because, in the connotation of where that was written, there was a lot of stuff that was going on that Paul was trying to address in that church, and I've written papers on that and studied it. And I've read about 12 books because I was really concerned. I really wanted to be right with God. It's like, if I'm going to step out into ministry and have a voice for you, is this even okay for me to have a voice? And after in-depth study, it is okay for me to have a voice. It's a tough situation, because I know that lots of people don't necessarily agree with that. And there's a lot of arguments that could say that's different, but I always go back to how did Jesus treat women? And who did he show himself to first when he was resurrected? And then he expected those guys, the women, to go out and tell people. If they were actually the first evangelists, you know what I mean? It's like how Jesus treated women was huge. And so I always go back to that example, and I think that's ultimately what the example is. And so you're always going to have people, SJ, that are going to, tell you stuff and throw things out of context, and they just do not understand, and they don't want to take the time to understand. And that's what's frustrating to me. It's like, okay, I'll teach you what I know if you really want to learn. And then they don't. They just want to throw these little quick sound bites out there and, cause a little ruckus and leave.
Yeah. What do you think about that, Lori?
Well, yeah, I don't disagree with anything Lisa said. I both of you were on your first marriage, correct?
Yes.
Am I the only one on my second? Okay. So I know from experience what it's like to be married to somebody who doesn't have exactly the same convictions you do, about spiritual convictions that you do. And it makes an enormous difference. And I think one of the biggest mistakes, and women make it too, is that they read the idea that the husbands are to lead their wives, and then they shut the Bible as though there's nothing else the Bible has to say about marriage ever. Husbands, lead your wives. End of story. And there's so much more that's not being taken into account. And I think that every time I teach young women, I get the opportunity to teach them about dating and marriage. The foundational scripture that I always go to is Ephesians 5:25. Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. So if you're going to marry somebody, who's going to be like Jesus, if you're going to marry someone who's going to actually fulfill his obligations to God on behalf of his wife, he's got to love her self-sacrificially. He's got to be willing to love her with her best interest in mind and not his. He's got to be willing to love her. He's got to be willing, if we're going to be, all cards on the table, he's got to love that woman so much that the effort that is expended in taking care of her, making her flourish, granting her all the things that she needs to be safe and provided for, to the extent that it would cause him to die a public death, that's the way he's supposed to love his wife. Why would I fight with and refuse to cooperate a man who's putting out that much effort for my best interest?
That's right.
That would be dumb. So I think that we have to really understand that verse is not in there as a license for husbands to be dictatorial. It's exactly the opposite. It's the purpose. It teaches the purpose that men are supposed to serve their wives. That's what Jesus did to the church. Remember, he says, no, I'm the Son of God. I didn't come to be served. I came to serve.
Right.
And so he died in order to have his bride, in order to pursue his bride, in order for her to trust him enough to be committed to him in that covenant, consummation, conception kind of relationship.
Yeah.
That's how he earned her trust. He died for her. And so that's the way our men are supposed to love us and lead us, is with self-sacrifice, not with a heavy hand. And when we understand that correctly, it takes a lot of the weight off, because let's face it, men are hard to deal with if you're a woman. But if your husband is standing in the gap between you and the rest of the world, that makes that a whole lot easier to navigate those relationships in that world. So if our husbands, if we have the right idea about marriage, then we don't want to fight with our husbands. We don't want to elbow our way to the front of the line. We want to let our husbands have that role of leadership, because ultimately he's charged by God to use his authority in our best interest. And that's helpful. That's helpful to us. So anyway, I think that it's really important that we get that straight. And instead of allowing people to simply give us basically a caricature of what the Bible says, to cut it off too early, say the Bible says that men can treat their women any way they want. That is just not true. And we have to be willing to speak up and say that.
Yeah, I think it's also an area of respect. I think that women can be very critical of their men. And one of the things that men really need, and I think to have a good marriage is you have to have respect for your husband. You have to respect him. And, he needs to show that he has these qualities, and he has these qualities. Well, it's easy to respect somebody like that. If you're in an abusive relationship and the husband's treating you badly, well, then it's very difficult for a woman to respect that. So I think there's a mutual thing going on there that, the man has to do these things, but then the woman also has to come alongside and support her husband verbally with encouragements and respect, and be his cheerleader, and, make him feel, that, hey, you know what, you're doing a great job. Thank you for what you're doing. Thank you for, the hard work you put in. And I think I was born in the 1960s, where the feminism movement, reared its head, and I was pretty little back then, so I didn't really take that much in. But by the time I, got older, the whole idea was very against that. It was like this, again, that earlier I was talking about expressive individualism. It was like this individual, like, you don't need anybody, and, why should you even treat your husband good? Just tell him what to do and leave and go get a job and whatever, and I think that, that I understand why that happened. I think because women were treated badly, that there was a rebelliousness that came out of that movement, because for so long, women have been treated really badly, like second-class citizens. And, we didn't even have the right to vote until 1920, wasn't it? I mean, it's only been 100 years we've even been allowed to vote. So I understand why feminism happened, because there was a rebelliousness in it, and this was a knee-jerk response, but it went way too far, and that's one of the reasons why
I'd say lately it's gone way too far.
Yeah.
I used to identify myself as a feminist, and then I started listening to what they're saying. And I thought, wait a second, I'm not in with this crew. Just cut me out. So I think they've taken it a little too far, like you're saying.
I always go back to what happened before the fall. the definition of male and female before the fall. I mean, that God said both of you are to have dominion and work together to manage the planet, basically, as a partnership. It was a partnership, and the male and female, they make up the fullness of the image of God. And that's one of the reasons why I think people misunderstand, like when we talk about like why we think a male and female should be the epitome of a marriage. It to me, it's like a male and a female come together as a whole circle, and that's the fullness of the image of God. Male and female is the image of God, right? He created him, male and female in the image of God. And so when you have just two females or two males, you don't really have the fullness of the human experience, I think. And there is a complement. There is a complement, and I don't care what people say about this gender stuff these days. I mean, the bottom line is women's brains are actually wired differently than men's. They've done studies on the neurological ways that the women's brains work differently than men's. There's just a lot of stuff that goes on that's different between us, but they're complement. So they're meant to work together as a whole, and I think as a partnership. And if you go back before the fall, that's the way it was set up. So I think, I mean, it's really hard. I don't want to judge people and make them feel bad for choices they've made or stuff that's happened. I understand that, there's life is hard and pressures happen and people make choices and stuff. But I think that the bottom line is that male and female should be partners to bring the kingdom of God to earth. And that's ultimately, the biblical worldview we were talking about that has been kind of pushed away. That's a Christian value that doesn't really line up with an American value anymore, because we've lost our sense of that. We don't really, we haven't really been sort of even teaching that.
Yeah, one of the things that we have to do, I think, as Christians in general, but specifically as apologists, is to do something that Dr. Schaefer used to talk about. Are you familiar with Francis Schaefer? Officially, my favorite Presbyterian is Dr. Francis Schaefer.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things he talks about, is that so many times people will take issue with an element of the Christian worldview. They don't like the biblical marriage ethic. They don't like, this, whatever it is. But we tend, and we do it too as Christians, we tend to seize on, abortion is the problem, or feminism is the problem, or postmodernism is the problem. And the reality is, Dr. Schaefer used to say, you've got to stop looking at the bits and pieces. You've got to start looking at the whole picture and see where the bits and pieces are departing from the whole picture. And one of the things that you mentioned a second ago, Lisa, is the creation of man and woman before the fall. If you go through creation week, day one, God creates day one. At the end of day one, he calls it good. Second day, same thing, calls it good. We get all the way to day 5. He creates men and he says, it's not good that for man to be alone. So then he creates he creates Eve. And then when all that is done, it's very good. So it goes from good to good to good to not good to very good when she is entered into the picture, because it's complete then. Yeah. It's complete. So we are the bow on the package. The women are the bow on the package. None of this was done until we were finished. And I think the reason that is because Eve, is the picture of the church. Jesus and, Adam was the picture of Jesus, and Eve was the picture of the church. And the relationship between the two of them is the picture of the relationship that Jesus has with each one of us, and the new life that is grown as a result of that relationship. So she is incredibly important in the biblical worldview. And so that's one of the things we have to make sure people understand, is that there is this bigger picture to look at, and not just the individual scriptures that they find, that certain people find discomforting, or they might even go so far as to say they're immoral. That you have to widen the lens a bit and help them see the bigger picture.
That's good. Preach it, girl. Come on.
I'm telling you. Speaking the truth here.
You are doing great.
Yeah, it's all good. I want to say, I see Stephen Rivard in the chat. He's actually sent me a really good video on historical Jesus. And so I will put that on my channel. He wants me to put it on my channel. And so thank you, Stephen. I will definitely do that. And I also want to say thank you to everybody else in the chat. Hi guys, great to see everybody here. And it's always good. I think going back to what both of you have talked about a little bit here is this idea of men and women are different in some good ways. For example, for thousands of years, men were the ones who were out hunting and gathering and bringing back the food, and the women were the ones who were home nurturing the kids and making the meals and doing that kind of thing. And I think that's one of the reasons why we're wired a little bit differently. Women are more nurturing, tend to be less assertive in general, and men tend to be the aggressors. And you see that with little boys, like punching each other and doing all this stuff that I would never do to my sister when I was growing up. So,
yes, but this is not popular to talk about nowadays, because people don't like those. They don't like the traditional stereotypes and stuff. And so, and not everybody fits in those categories exactly that way. And as a Christian, I would say to a person like that, what, that's okay. If you're, a woman who wants to be, a little bit more physical and do different stuff, I mean, that doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing. It just means that, hey, you know what, that's what you're into. That's okay. But it doesn't take away the fact that you're still a woman, though. You could be a woman and be athletic and be whatever, I mean, so I think that, it's okay. I think what's happened is that some of these stereotypes and these gender issues that we've come across have been so deeply ingrained, and people have thought, well, gosh, if you're out of this normal thing, we're going to think you're weird. And that's another thing that's happened. I think that has been sort of a rebellious reaction to those kinds of things. Same thing with the feminism. It's like there was such a confinement to women that they rebelled, and the feminism that happened. And I think there's been a stereotype of, what's typically male and what's typically female. And now there's a rebellion against that, but it doesn't take away the fact that you're still male or female. I mean, you're still, down to your DNA, you're male or female, but you can be, I mean, I remember that I had plenty of girlfriends back in the day that were tomboys or whatever you want to call them, and that's okay. It doesn't mean, it's just okay to be that way. It doesn't mean that, oh gosh, you're not a woman. Could you want to have, play with G.I. Joe or whatever, So anyways, I mean, I one thing that I do know is that God loves everybody. God loves everybody. And, to be adopted into the family of God, you have to have a belief in Jesus Christ. But it doesn't take away the fact that he still loves you. He loves everyone. He created everyone in his image. He created people. Like the bigger narrative, Lori, that you were talking about, the bigger narrative, this is all about relationship with our Creator. That's ultimately where this whole thing's going, and I think this division and the stuff that's happening in the world right now is because we're just not aware of that anymore. We've gotten so like scientific oriented and media oriented, and we've lost sight of the bigger picture, the wonder of it all, the wonder of creation, the wonder of the fact that God actually did this thing. I mean, people say there's no evidence for God. I can't see evidence. I'm like, how can you not see evidence? It's the beauty in creation to me is so evident,
Yes, I agree.
So those are the kinds of things that I'm like, wow, I mean, it just goes to show you that there's lots of different perspectives. And I think, the hardest part, SJ, about what we're doing right now is how do we navigate all these different perspectives? How do we, we live in this pluralistic America now. America doesn't have, a cohesion of a moral code anymore. We've lost that. And so I don't know how we get back there, but I think that we need to have some sort of cohesion, some type of unifying force to help us get back to the United States of America. You know what I mean? Not the divided states of America.
Well, we always hope our presidents can do that, but I think because the parties are so split, I don't know if it's even possible for anybody to be able to unite us. I mean, I just don't. I would hope that the leader of the country could be able to do that, but there's just so much animosity going on now, and I think it's fueled by social media. I don't think social media has done us any favors as far as a lot of different things.
Yeah, it's been the ultimate human experience. Experiment, I should say. It's only been around. Facebook's only been around since 2008. So for 12 years, look how radically our lives have changed just in 12 years.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Well, I want to go back to a little bit on American values really quickly, but I was thinking about capitalism and talking about that a little bit, because I think about the parable of the talents, where one person's given 10, 5, and 2 talents, and the person with the 2 just goes and buries it, or 1 or 2, I forget what it was, but buries the talent, and the other 2 invested the talent. And the master came back and scolded the one who buried the talent and blessed the 2 who invested it. And I think, aha, Jesus is capitalist.
There you go. That's all we need to say.
So
yeah, I'm not, when it comes to capitalism and stuff, I mean, I think it's probably the best system we have globally. I mean, I don't think it's a perfect system.
No, it's definitely not perfect. There's greed in it, unfortunately, too much greed.
Yeah, but that's why we have to have laws. We have to have like an anti-monopoly law and these kinds of laws, because if we didn't, then I think greed would be unchecked. But I don't see any other system in the world that's any better than what we have. So until Jesus comes back, that's all we got.
Yeah, so we have our theocracy. Yeah. So good. Well, should we maybe get it to tying things up? We're a little after 5. We've been going for a little over an hour, and this has been a fascinating conversation with you guys.
Well,
I guess that's a Midwestern coming through where I say you guys, even though I'm talking to 2 women. You women.
Well, Lori's going to say y'all because she's from Texas. Y'all coming back.
Yeah, you wait long enough. It's pretty certain that I'm fixing to say y'all. It just always happens.
Just fixing.
Well, I'm from California originally, so I'll just say dude.
Oh, that's so funny. Well, I'll say I got a pop and I jumped up on the rough. That's how I used to speak when I was from Illinois. I tried to lose some of that, but I don't think I've lost it all. People can still tell where I'm from.
I used to say, oh, gnarly dude. It's really gnarly.
So anyway, do you guys want to share anything on what you're working on now? I have links to both of your, I don't know, Lisa, I don't know if I have links to, I'll make sure I get links to your stuff in the channel, in the description. Okay. So people can find you guys. But do you want to let anyone in the crowd here know what you're working on next, or what YouTube videos you're thinking about, or blogs or anything like that?
Well, I don't really have a YouTube channel. We do some stuff for women in apologetics. So I don't have a channel like yours, where I interview people. We started doing that and we kind of changed it up a little bit. So the only thing I'm working on, I'm writing a lot. So I want to write another book, and I have written the devotional that I'll probably publish hopefully by the end of the year. Just self-publishing, I'm just like, wow, the traditional publishing, they want you to jump through so many hoops to traditionally publish. If you're a new author, it's crazy.
They do.
But I'm writing on the apologetics of religious experience. So I'm doing research on that, because one of the things that I've found in my social media connections, and I've been doing the social media Twitter thing for 5 years now, so I've watched a lot of people's response. And one of the biggest problems is a lack of a religious experience. Like, a lot of people just don't have that, and I think that can hinder people from faith in God, even though it's a very subjective thing. It's not this evidential based issue, but I do think that there's evidence for religious experience. So I'm trying to sort of figure out how to research that, because I think there is a lot of people that have religious experience. And so how do you quantify that? How do you understand what that is if you're a seeker and you want some of that? But yet I understand that sometimes we can be totally wrong in our religious experience too. So that's why I'm going to try to tie it all together and figure out how to help people, because I feel like that's an area where people really, really want to connect. Like my son, he's 18 years old, and he knows that he's a believer because I taught him apologetics. So he knows that it makes more sense to believe in God than not believe in God. And he understands that Christianity makes the best sense of the information as well. But he's like, he still doesn't get how to connect with God. How do you connect with God? Like, am I just praying to air? You know what I mean? So so that's my focus right now. And I'm going to be really hardcore, like, researching that and just dive in. I have 50 books I want to read and just go into that. So that's a very long-winded answer to your question. So thank you for letting me expound on that.
No, I just want to add to what you just said for a second before going to Lori, but I wanted to note, if you're doing that, what you should do is collect people's stories.
Yeah.
Go around and collecting people's stories. And then you do what they call subjective content analysis. So you look at the content and you look at the themes that you're seeing throughout, like woven themes that you're seeing again and again. Yeah. And then you put that together. That's actually considered an empirical study, if you did.
Okay. Maybe I'll talk to you more about that offline.
Yeah, good. Okay. Good. And how about you, Lori? What are you working on?
Yeah, I'm actually in the middle of a revamp right now. So if anybody has any suggestions, questions you want answered, topics you want covered, I am totally open right now, because I'm kind of redoing everything. But I took an online class about how to build an online class. And one of the things that was suggested is that when you put your class members through your class, what you want to be able to do is to have kind of an objective framework, things they can check off the list that shows them that they're moving from wherever they are now to wherever they want to be. And so I kind of created a little framework for that, and I'm working on filling in all of the gaps. The idea being that we as Christians in today's 21st century environment, we have two separate branches, so to speak, of growth in our walk with God. And number one is the personal one, the discipleship. First, you have to start the relationship with Jesus first, and then you have to nurture that relationship. And that obviously has some very healing qualities. It will heal you of your sense of identity. If you have a crushed identity, it will heal you, help you heal your emotions. It will help you heal and tame your actions and your reactions, that sort of thing. So our discipleship is one front. But I got really inspired. My husband and I are reading the 1 Year Daily Bible together. We've done it separately for years, but we started reading it together. And recently we were reading, I think, in First Chronicles, and Joab, who's in David's army, began to fight a battle, and he saw that the battle was on two fronts. And so he enlisted Abiathar, the priest, to go fight this battle, and then he was going to fight this one. He said, when you need help, I'll come to you, and when I need help, you come to me. And so that's how I see our walk with God. We have the discipleship aspect, which we have to, the daily Bible reading, prayer, spiritual disciplines, church involvement, service in church, relationships with other Christians, fellowship, that sort of thing. But the other front is the evidential front. We've got to learn the evidence for our faith, and they inform one another. The more informed we become about why Christianity is true, the more deep and rich it makes the discipleship process. And the more our discipleship process grows and we love the Lord and we're devoted to him, then we're able to appreciate the truth and wrap our heads around the truth of the Christian worldview to help explain to our kiddos or our family members or our neighbors who aren't quite there yet. And so I'm working on a curriculum that kind of goes both, it covers both, that fights the battle on both fronts. Awesome. So that's what I'm working on, because ultimately, not only do we receive healing because we are redeemed, we become the people God always intended us to be before the fall. We become those people when we have our relationship with Jesus. But if enough of us will do that, then I think it actually will heal this nation. We will begin to think, we'll begin to recreate that consensus. We'll begin to think the same way about marriage and think the same way about politics, or at least similarly. There'll be less division, because in the Christian worldview, you love your enemies. You don't pounce on them on social media. You don't hate them. You don't try to overturn them like in a Marxist philosophy. You live, patiently and peaceably with them. You love them and bless them and pray for them and do things for them. That's how you treat your enemies in a Christian worldview. And so if we can teach people that Christian worldview, then it not only heals us, it heals society. So those are my plans.
Good.
Awesome.
Great.
Love that.
I love it. Both the plans are really good. You guys are walking with God. And I was actually looking at the chat. It's funny. Somebody's making kind of jokes about the size of my audience, which is really small. And somebody said, maybe, you never know, maybe one of the teenage viewers may end up being the next William Lane Craig or Billy Graham. Well, I'll tell you guys, two of my subscribers are my two sons. And a lot of times when I'm doing this, they're downstairs watching. They don't tell me. They tell me at the end.
What about you, SJ? What plans you got going, girl?
So I'm working on, right now I'm working on, I wrote a couple of little books, and I wrote this book called A Quick and Concise Case for Christ. And I put a link in here in the description, but nice. I'm working on a book called The Power of One. And as I'm reading things and collecting more and more information, I'm discovering some really cool things. Like I'm looking at, for example, there's some neat stuff I forgot the name of the person, Shimon something. There was a person in Alexander the Great's time, and it started occurring in the temple, miracles. You're allowed to go into the holiest of holies once a year. And these miracles started around Alexander the Great's time. And they discontinued 40 years before 70. So this is 40 years before the temple was destroyed. Not Tacitus. Yeah, I actually think it is Tacitus. Definitely Josephus said that that miracle stopped. However, the doors in the temple started opening up and closing by themselves. And then, of course, there was a big light in the temple and all of this other kind of stuff. So I'm looking at some of the really interesting things around the ancient times in that first 100 years. And so,
Wow. Good for
and
you.
some of the stuff having to do with the temple. And so that's what I want to write about.
So are you going to try traditional publishing, or are you just going to self-publish?
No, I'm just self-publishing.
I know.
I think you might have to self-publish until you can finally get something of a following, and then maybe go out and try traditional.
Well, I've actually talked to plenty of people who self-published, and they actually do pretty well. Like they sell them when they go speaking engagement. You can sell them on Amazon. You can sell them on your website. I mean, so it's not a bad thing to do. I mean, the whole purpose that I'm into this is just to help people. I don't care about, I'm not into trying to make a bunch of money. I'm not making a dime, I'm just trying to help people with their faith. And I think that that's the key, is just to get the stuff out there, so good for you. I think it sounds really interesting. I'll buy a book when it comes out.
Oh, I'll just send you a free one. The books actually are on my kids' dressers. They haven't opened them or cracked them, but they're there. And so I figure if I die, they're going to know everything they can possibly know that I've learned about Christianity. And so I figured they're safe.
Well, it's going to be like at least 40, 50 more years before you go see the Lord. Come on. You're going to make it into your 90s.
Oh, I hope.
Well, hey, listen, I know we probably need to continue some of this conversation on Twitter, or at least through email, but I don't know, obviously, with COVID, what the future looks like as far as the group events. But in the past, there has been a conference called She Speaks. We should all try to go together, and maybe
that'd be fun,
because it's specifically Christian women who blog and write and speak. And they have workshops for helping you be better bloggers, writers, and speakers. And they sometimes will have publishers that you can get an appointment with and pitch your proposal to. So
we could all roommate together. We can go. We can be like
that would be fun.
The three amigas.
Yeah, that'd be really fun. I love it.
Yeah, that'd be great.
I'd go to that as soon as this COVID pandemic dies down.
And it will someday. It will.
Yeah, someday. I know it's been such a challenge on people. I feel so bad. I mean, there's so many people right now who are out of work, and it's just really terrible for a lot of people.
Terrible. Yeah.
So, well, all right, ladies, I'm going to go ahead and end the stream. I want to say thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you for having us, SJ. It's always so much fun when we get together and talk on your channel.
It is great.
Yeah. So, all right, I'm going to go ahead and here we go.
Bye. God bless you guys.
You too.
God bless.
Okay.
Okay, now it's just, whoops, oh, she left.